Welcome back to a bit gamey and a Mars series on an alternative World War Two. It's mostly going to be the same. It's just a couple of things that I want to do differently. So it's a kind of fancy World War Two, kind of. Okay, so there's three things that I've got in mind. First is to make the fall of France slower, because but basically I think the gist of the early blitzkrieg is just that people hadn't learned yet to do defense in depth and to have enough mobile anti-tank guns so that they could move to wherever the enemy attacked. You could move your mobile anti-tank guns to that spot and then blunt the attack. Because in the historical fall of France, they hadn't really got that yet, and so the Germans would just break through at Sedan and then race from there straight across to get to the Channel port, and then all the British and French that had gone into Belgium ended up getting trapped. So I don't want that because the fall of France is too quick. I like all the early war tanks, and I like the kind of northwest Euro terrain, and it's over too soon. So my first bit of alternative World War Two is just having that slower. Is to have that they'd learned somewhere before, either in Spain or in France, in Poland, that they need more kind of a reserve of mobile anti-tank guns, or slightly more defence in depth. It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for them to win, but it's enough to slow it down. So the general idea is I was going to have it all works exactly the same. The British and French move into Belgium, and the Germans come through the Ardennes, cross over at Sedan, and then instead of being able to just race to the coast, they get slightly blocked. There's a bit more defence in depth and a bit more anti-tank guns, and so it's the initial defence line gets turned, and they have to retreat back to a second defence line, but it's not completely they're not completely broken. And then at the second defence line, they break through again and turn it again, and they have to fall back further. So basically, in my version, it's going to be that the French fall back to the line, to the Loire, and the British end up back, basically doing a reverse Normandy. So I can take all the maps and stuff that people have done for the Normandy campaign and just do it in reverse, and maybe Britain as well. So that's the first stage of my alternate World War Two. It's going to be like that. It's going to be not exactly a World War One scenario, but a kind of halfway between Blitzkrieg and World War One, so that the French and the British are constantly getting their flank turned and knocked back, but not as fast as has happened in reality. So that's the first phase. A longer, slower river crossing type fall of France, with the British ending up doing a kind of reverse Normandy, and the French gradually retreating across down the various river defence lines. So that's that, and that's going to be the first stage of my alternative World War Two. Just as slightly slower fall of France, but then they get betrayed or stabbed in the back by both the Italians and the Spanish. That's the big difference. They come in and take them from behind, and so that knocks the French out. But anyway, the gist of that was going to be the final end, and where the British troops get evacuated, not from Dunkirk, but from somewhere in Normandy or whatever. So that was stage one, a slower fall of France. Right. So the next stage after after this, slower kind of fall of France, with the British getting pushed back towards Normandy, and eventually getting Dunkirk off Normandy, and the French getting pushed back into the south, with Germans pushing them back. And then the next day is that they get stabbed in the back by the French, get stabbed in the back by the Italians coming from that direction, and also the Spanish. I'm putting the Spanish in the war for particular reasons in mind. So that's the end of that. France falls at that point, and Spain is in the war. So the reason for wanting Spain in the war is Gibraltar. I want the Mediterranean kind of bottled up. Basically, I don't like the western desert part of the war, because it's a desert basically, which is no fun for me. It's just, long range tank battles, and having to constantly kind of retreat all the time is not my cup of tea. So I'm saying that the Germans get hold of Gibraltar via the Spanish, and that seals up the Royal Navy from the Mediterranean, and so the rest of it is much easier. So the Spanish doing whatever they're doing in northwest Africa, the Italians pushing through Libya, and the Germans mostly going through the Balkans to Crete to Cyprus, and then an Italian German landing in Levant. And the reason for this is for making it go this way is I don't like the desert fighting, and I also don't like Stalingrad. It's like too unpleasant for me. It's too unpleasant to imagine fighting in this kind of bombed out city while you're freezing to death at the same time. So I just don't like that. So I'm going to make my Stalingrad be Alexandria, or it doesn't have to be Alexandria, but the whole Nile Delta and down the Nile. So the British are defending that, and there's various kind of Stalingrads going on in the towns and cities around here, and so the British are up against it, or British and their allies are up against it here, and you've got the because I want to collect an army for Italians, Africa Corps, and British and Allied, and so it's going to be in an urban fighting, but in a Middle Eastern zone. So that's just because I want to. So to get a general gist of the idea of what the Nile Delta looked like, I'm going to assume that say the Germans and Italians are pushed through all the way into this basic region, and the British are basically defending river lines along in the Nile Delta. Whereas it's Alamein is in that area there, so it's not far from Alexandria. So you've got Alexandria on the western edge of this big Suez Delta, and various towns along there. I'm going to assume that travel along here, along the left on the outer edge, is quite difficult. So they're mainly the main communication is through it's Alexandria or Cairo. So basically, that's what I'm saying. It's basically a kind of a Stalingrad situation, but in Middle Eastern type terrain. This is just a couple of old maps of Alexandria from ancient times, or relatively modern. You've got your harbours, you've got various the outskirts of the town, and the big rivers and canals. This is also a sort of general thing of Alexandria. You've got big lagoon. You've got the desert on the west, right on the edge, coming up to the swampy bits of the Nile Delta. So the terrain is relatively interesting in that it's going to be urban and swampy. just get an idea that in the western bits of Alexandria, they look like a western city, more or less. It could be Paris or whatever. So I don't really want to do in that central core part of Alexandria, but more on the around the edges. And some pictures of roughly what I want the terrain to look like. It's going to be this kind of almost Afghanistan type houses, but crammed all together in compounds, and lots of water about, and lots of date trees or palm trees or whatever those are. That's going to be an idea of the sort of the kind of the slum / village sort of terrain. And outside, you've got large, lots of waterways. It's basically a kind of, because the Nile Delta is basically a kind of drained swamp. So lots of flat land with waterways and clumps of trees, and then the kind of urban bits. Yeah, again, just another indication of what I want the terrain to look like. So so that's basically it. That's my plan, is to have Stalingrad in Alexandria, and it doesn't actually make any sense, but it's what I want. So the first stage of my alternative World War II is a much slower fall of France. And then there's a big, fast bit, and then it fast forwards to the next bit, which is going to be Stalingrad in Alexandria. So that's that. The third thing that I wanted to change or add to my alternate World War II is something I remember reading about in the from the First World War, where there was this part of Africa was called German East Africa, and there's quite a lot of kind of fighting in that between sort of very mobile German troops and British troops. I don't know much about it apart from the fact that it's well, at least my memory is of lots of cavalry fighting each other in East Africa during the First World War. So there's that, and there's a second thing. An aspect of that was this thing called the Cape to Cairo Railway, which the idea was like the British were going to build a railway from Cape Town in the South Africa up to Rhodesia, and then from there all the way to Cairo. All the various British colonies along the eastern edge of Africa. And once the Germans lost German East Africa, which happened after the First World War, I think, there's a chance for this kind of direct route. And as you can see, the original route was going up through East Africa and then going past Ethiopia, through the Sudan to Egypt, to Cairo. And here's another picture of it, is of the original kind of red dream, which is going through all the different British colonies up to Cairo, which whatever, it's kind of it was an idea. And later on, there's been various updatings of it at various times, and here's one that was more recent, which is in like 2017 or whatever it was, that sort of timescale, which includes a railhead going up from Mombasa in Kenya up to Nairobi, and then from there to Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, and then around up to Cairo, up to Egypt. So what I'm thinking of with my for my third sort of big shift, is like I'm saying, given I'm doing this kind of Stalingrad in Alexandria and Cairo, basically Egypt under siege, under urban siege, with the British, fighting off desperately, blocking the, between the Suez Canal and the Nile Delta, getting attacked from both sides. And the plan is to either build a railroad all the way up to Cairo, and as a secondary thing, building a railhead from Mombasa in Kenya up to Nairobi, and then building a railhead to Addis Ababa. So building one from Cape Town upwards, and as a secondary plan is to do one from Mombasa up to Addis Ababa, and then into Sedan, and then up to supplying Egypt, but from the south. So that's the basic idea. So the second stage of my alternate World War II is the Stalingrad in Egypt, and the third stage is the British building this railroad, starting from Nairobi, going up to Addis Ababa, and then through Sudan to Egypt. So that's the third. Say, inspired by the World War One stories of British fighting Germans in East Africa, and having an updated version of that to do with the World War Two. So on the surface, this is very silly. Why do I want to do this? And the basic reason is it's inspired by the reading about the World War One stuff, and it's partly because I don't like the Western Desert. Is say just lots of tanks firing at long range, and I mean I prefer infantry stuff, and it's just no fun for me, that whole Western Desert thing. However, what I do like is armour cars. I like the idea of armour car battalions or whatever fighting each other somewhere, and so I'm basically going to do that. I'm going to say, because the oil supply or petrol supply in these regions is low, so you can't. There's not enough oil to supply like an armoured division. So instead, they use. I'm going to say that they use armoured cars instead. So say, for example, you had an armoured division with 3 battalions of tanks. In this situation, it's going to be like an armoured division where there's like 2 battalions of armoured cars and 1 of tanks. You see what I mean? So basically, that's the idea. It's going to be this a railheads going forward from Kenya up through Ethiopia, where they're constructing the railway, and bit by bit, and you've got these armoured car battalions leading the way and protecting it. So it's going to be a kind of a kind of armoured car war going through Ethiopia, because I just find that appealing. It sounds like fun to me, and the Italians are quite big on the armoured cars as well. So they're going to have a load of armour, because these parts were originally colonies of Italy, Eritrea, and Somalia. I can't remember. I don't know if they were in 1939, but I'm going to say they were. And also that they tried to invade Ethiopia at some point in the 1930s, and it hadn't worked out. So I'm going to say that because of the previous map of arrows, that the Germans and Italians had got through Levant and to the west of Cairo. So they're both fighting to get rid of this Stalingrad, Alexandria, and the Italians had also, they couldn't get up through the Suez Canal because it's still British controlled, but they'd taken the Levant, and I'm saying there's railway lines from there up to roughly where the Ethiopia meets the kind of Horn of Africa, or whatever it's called. So they go up to there on the other side of the Red Sea, and they supplying their troops through that into the Italian Somaliland. So they have a supply through that region, but it's not very good. And the British have got a supply up through the railway line, but it's also not very good. They can land oil in Mombasa or whatever and bring a bit up. So basically, both sides, both the Italians and Germans allies and the British have got weak supplies. So they're fighting around this. The British are trying to set forward this railway line a bit at a time, where they're fighting off attacks from the Africa Corps and Italians. So it's basically it's like the Western Desert, except it's going to be mostly armored cars in this place where the supply is very difficult. So there's a relatively small amount of forces on each side fighting in Ethiopia to get this railway up past Adibat and through to Cairo. So that's the basic premise. It's all very silly and so non-historical and all this of it. So don't treat it as anything else. But it just gives me the opportunity to have like various armored car battles in Ethiopia. So that's number 3 on my list of things to do. I don't know when I'm going to get started on it, but it's it's number 3 after Stalingrad in Alexandria, and after I've finished off doing the slow fall of France. And as an idea, this is an idea roughly the sort of train that's going to be or potentially part of this thing, where you got it's loads of big mountains in Ethiopia, and it's and I'm going to say the forces involved are going to be too small to actually occupy them. So it's just going to be like if you imagine a whole load of armored cars in that flat bit, it's going to be kind of like that. Oh no, don't know what I did then. Yes, these are all pictures of roughly around the Ethiopian sort of terrain, sort of roughly. I mean, some of it is probably isn't. It's from different times, but you see, big flat valley with roads sneaking through, but high hills on either side. That's the one I saw before. There wasn't. What did I do there? There was the Rift Valley, East African Rift Valley, which is something I'd heard about before, but it may be of use, or in terms of thinking about what the train should look like. I think the general idea is that you got these this Rift Valley, and you kind of got to follow the path basically to get anywhere where you want. It's going to be this kind of Rift Valley with big mountains on either side. So that effectively it affects where you can travel. So yes, it is an example of what it looks like. These broad valleys with steep mountains on either side. And so you can imagine, you got to come through there, you got to fight through there, then turn around and go through that bit, and then go around that bit. So you're very constrained in terms of your geography, where you can travel. Same thing with a lot more trees, Rift Valley, river, lots of hills. That one, yeah, that was one. This one, I don't actually think this is in Ethiopia. I think it's somewhere else, but on one of those Rift Valley bits, or nearer to Somalia maybe. And again, another thing, sort of like big flat terrain, but with giant mountains next door. And the last thing is a picture of Victoria Falls, which is obviously nowhere near where I'm talking about, but it's interesting that the railway bridge is right by it. You can imagine, if you were fighting across this, you've got this bridge and you've got this giant waterfall to your side. It's all very aesthetic. That was just to give me a rough idea of the sort of train that was going to be in that third thing. So this is a Mars. I got 3 projects on the go, or three projects in mind. There's the alternative World War II. There's the horse and bucket one, which is mostly Marlborough, and the third one is Normans in Sicily, which I'm going to do a thing on as well. So those are the 3 Mars projects that are kind of current, and this is the third stage of the alternative World War II one. Okay, I don't know if that's any interest to anyone, but it's kind of useful for me as a kind of diary entry of what I'm aiming at. Because with all my projects, they tend to gradually get additions, get added to, and the timing all goes totally mental. But this is the aim for the World War II section. But I've got to get through all the early conquest of France first. But it is just as a kind of reminder for me for when I finally get there. Okay, to the bit. So that's basically the gist of it all. It's a kind of a minor diversion from the course of the war, to kind of cover up bits I don't like and replace them with bits I do like. After that phase, where they get pushed out of France, and then there's Stalingrad in Egypt, and the kind of what do you call it? The kind of fight back where the British build a railway up from Kenya. I'm gonna say it mostly goes back to the same way as historical. I'm gonna say the Japanese held back a bit from Pearl Harbor because the Germans were going much slower. But then after Spain joined in, and the British got shut out of the Mediterranean, the Japanese attacked, and that brought America into the war. And as soon as America's into the war, it's all over really. Well, not all over, but it's they're going to win because they can produce so much more stuff than other people. So I'm going to say after the British gradually get their railway up to Alexandria, and that's around the same time as the Americans join in, and they do various stuff like they land in North Africa, and that liberates Gibraltar. And so the Royal Navy gets back into the Mediterranean, and all these armies across the sea get cut off, and the Americans go through the usual thing, North Africa, Spain, and Italy, and coming out that way, Spain gives in, and then Normandy happens. So it's all basically goes to the same historical pattern after this little detour into armoured cars in Ethiopia. So I say this is mostly for me. It's like a diary entry, so I've got it in my head, because no idea when I'll get around to doing any of this. But so it's there anyway. I can look back on it at any time. I think it might have inspired. Well, I don't think it's going to inspire anyone. But it's fun. But I think you can do that really with historical stuff and just nudge it a little in different directions just to do what you want. But I don't know. Maybe it's just me. But anyway, okay. Have a good time. Toodle pip.